Welcome. This is Anointed Breakout Ministry. My name is Pastor Gilbert Lundy, and we're glad to have you viewing in with us today. Our message today is coming from the book of Exodus. We're coming from the 14th chapter, verses 10 through 22. The book of Exodus, the 14th chapter, verses 10 through 22. Our focus verse, however, is verse 21. The title of the message today, The Red Sea Crossing. The Red Sea Crossing. Something most Christians are familiar with and non-Christians. The story about the Israelites and how God parted the waters for them to cross over the Red Sea on dry land. And that is what we will be discussing today. Looking at Exodus 14 and that 21st verse, which is our focus verse, it reads, Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. We won't hesitate getting right into our subject this evening. You know, when we take a look at the scriptures, if you were to go back and to read all of the scriptures that we're discussing, that the message comes from today in Exodus 14, 10 through 22, you would see that when you began to read those scriptures in the beginning of them, you would find where Pharaoh's army is actively pursuing the Israelites at that time. And when the Israelites start looking back, they're able to observe the vastness of Pharaoh's army, which is coming after them. And when they saw the vastness of this army, the Israelites became terrified and they began crying out in fear. But they didn't begin crying out in fear to God. They began crying out in fear against Moses. That's right. They cried out in fear against Moses as if it was Moses' fault that they were being chased. Now you see, they should have been crying out in faith unto the Lord, because he was the one who had the ability to save them from Pharaoh and his army. But instead, they were crying out in fear against Moses rather than crying out in faith unto the Lord. Now, this is what we sometimes do, just like the Israelites. We often look for someone to blame just like they did. They were blaming Moses for their circumstances. And that's what sometimes we do as people. There are times when we look for a scapegoat in order to blame our problems on, or to cast blame on for whatever we might be dealing with in life, whatever kind of situations we find ourselves in. Oftentimes people look for someone else to blame, but the truth is, if we were to often just look in the mirror, we might find the person that's to blame right there looking back at us, the reflection that we see in that mirror. Now, the scriptures in the message today makes it clear that the Lord led the Israelites into their present condition. However, the people would dare not to openly blame God. They were not going to just openly come out and blame God, but they felt very comfortable blaming his servant, Moses. And that's how we are. Sometimes we want to lash out at God, but we find it easier to lash out at somebody that we can look right in the face of and say, it's your fault. Now, this was not new when it came to the Israelites. This was a repeated tactic. They had done this numerous times throughout that 40 years they had spent out there on that wilderness journey. Many times they had blamed Moses for their conditions along the way. See, so the people obviously spoke out of fear, which resulted from a lack of faith in God's power. Now, Moses called for the people to have faith in the Lord because Moses knew that the Lord would save them. So he would plead with them and ask them to place their faith back in God, because Moses understood that if they all joined in and cried out unto the Lord, he would come to their rescue. When we cry out to the Lord, we must be sure that we trust and believe that he will come through this time as well as he has all the other times before. But if we cry out unto the Lord and we don't cry out in faith, believing that God will come through, then God just might not. But you know what? Oftentimes when we don't even believe, God still comes through. He still comes to our rescue, even when we don't show forth the trust that we should or the faith that we should have in him. You know, it does not matter how bleak a situation may seem. God is always able to come through. The Israel chances look kind of bad, but God had already promised them in the beginning that he would fight for them. If you take a look at Exodus 14 and 14, this is what it says. Moses told them, the Lord will fight for you and you shall hold your peace. The Lord will fight for you and you shall hold your peace. You know, right after the Lord gave them this reassurance, he spoke to Moses, and this is what he said. Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. God is telling them to stop sitting still. They had quit moving. God had already given them a command to move and the direction to move because he was leading and guiding them. And they had stopped there in the desert. So the Lord said, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. You know, there are times when the Lord has to tell us the same thing. Sometimes God has to tell us to get up and get busy doing what I have called you and anointed you to do. Sometimes God got to tell us to stop crying and making excuses and to go ahead and do the work that he has appointed for us to do. Because sometimes we find ourselves making excuses. We find ourselves trying to get out of doing what God has undoubtedly called us to do. We're sure that this is what we're supposed to be doing, yet we still sometimes get lackadaisical when it comes to doing the work of the Lord. Then the Lord instructed Moses, he said, stretch out your staff over the Red Sea. The Lord assured him that the sea would be divided and the people would walk over on dry land. The Lord additionally told Moses that they would be pursued by the Egyptians. They're going to keep coming for you. They're not going to stop. It's like our enemies. Sometimes they keep coming and they keep coming. But when you take time to turn it over to the Lord, he will do for you the same thing that he did for the Egyptians. He will defeat your enemies the same way he defeated Pharaoh and his army as they were pursuing the children of Israel. The Lord also revealed his purpose for doing all of this. In Exodus 14 and 18, it says, then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. See, the Lord was going to glorify himself by defeating the Egyptians and prove that he is the one and only Lord of all. There is no other God. He is the beginning, he is the end. He is the Alpha and the Omega. And he was going to prove that by what he was about to do concerning Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Have you ever wondered why the Egyptians followed after the Israelites? It makes you kind of think, why would they follow after them after they left out of Egypt? Especially after God had already cast 10 plagues upon them. After seeing all the power that their God possessed, I can't understand why they would chase after them. But it's because God had caused their hearts to be hardened. It wasn't that God did it. He just used something that was natural. Their natural inclinations was to do that. And they pursued it. So their hearts became hardened. They decided that they would do what they were going to do regardless of the power that they had seen demonstrated by the God of the Israelites. You know, before Moses could even respond to the instructions that he had received from the Lord, the pillar of cloud and fire moved between the Egyptians and the children of Israel. Now, the cloud was God's visible presence amongst his people, and now it created a shroud of darkness around the Egyptians so they could not see how to effectively pursue the Israelites. And then, as the Lord promised, when Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, it parted. The Lord protected his people as they journeyed through the sea on dry ground. No one was left behind, neither young nor elderly. Now, looking back, the Israelites could see the Lord was protecting them until they all reached the other side. When it comes to doing the Lord's will, don't be like the Israelites who displayed fear and a lack of faith. Trust and obey God, and remember, he will do your fighting for you if you would only stand still and allow him to have his way. We're good at saying, let God have his way. Well, do just that. Stand still and allow the Lord to have his way, and watch that God will fight your battles for you. He will direct your paths while providing protection as you go through on dry land the same way the Israelites did at the Red Sea. I thank you for joining us today. I pray God's blessing on you, your family, your friends, and all those that you know. Join us again when we come back together again and we meet right here on the patio room. Thank you, and God bless you.